الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على النبي وصحبه أجمعين. طيب يا أخواننا وأخوات, I want to start first of all, one thing that we're always criticized for in the smaller, less affluent masajid is that we're never willing to invest in our Islamic education. We're always the people who are criticized for expecting others to foot the bill for our education, for our benefit. And that criticism has been leveled against us here because of this. You guys know what this is, right? This is the book that we've been studying for the last maybe 4 weeks or so. And when we first came, we were saying that, hey, you know, we should get the book. The book's really inexpensive. I initially thought the book was like $3. Now I think the book's like $1.50. I think the book is actually $1.50 from Dar es Salaam and from some of these other bookstores. And those of us who intend to come regularly, I actually had made some copies, but then I was told, hey, if you keep making copies, they'll never purchase the book. They'll never invest in their Islamic education. And I thought that was a good point. It was a reasonable argument. So let's prove those who say that. Let's prove them wrong. And let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to go ahead and get the book. Like I said, it's about $1.50. And I think if we collect, everybody just gives their little $2 right now, we could give it to the Sheikh, and the Sheikh will get an order for us. You won't order it either. You won't even make the order for us. He will give you the money.
Sheikh is busy doing things.
The Sheikh is too busy doing things. Yeah. Okay, we'll get it ordered. We'll get it ordered. No problem.
Sorry.
It's fair. It's fair. We'll get it ordered.
I did it 2 times before. People have to start to learn to do things for themselves.
We'll get it ordered.
Sorry.
So I am ready now to donate $5 for 3 books. Okay? And you already got the book. So Ibrahim, if you take this. Take this. Just take it and collect it for me, please. So this is 1. And if anybody else wants to make a contribution toward that, and then we'll just get purchase books for everyone. So some people might not be able to contribute, but if everybody contributes what they can, then we'll be able to get books for the class and just distribute those out, disseminate whatever we have. Again, books about $1.50. And if we collect today, then we probably can have the books by next week. No, you don't have to give that much. Don't do that. Okay, I'll answer. Huh? Okay, hold on to that for me. Just hold on. Put it in an envelope. Put it in the Sheikh's office. Yeah. Put it in an envelope and put it in the Sheikh's office, please. Please do that for me, Brian. Yeah, do it. And then put the amount on it. Just put the amount, whatever you collected, put the amount outside the envelope. Yeah. All right. No, I got it. I'll take care of him. I'm not afraid of him. But, all right. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So we'll be continuing in the book Muslim Morals and Manners, and in the first section of it, which is essential morals for every Muslim. And the last subsection of that section is entitled Controlling Anger. Controlling Anger. And before we actually take up the topic, we'll mention some of the objectives of this subsection. The first objective is we'll be able to cite evidence from the Quran and Hadith. Cite evidence from the Quran and Hadith which stresses anger management. Cite evidence from the Quran and Hadith which stresses anger management. The second objective, we'll be able to explain why Islam has placed so much emphasis on controlling one's anger. Has placed so much emphasis on controlling one's anger. Why has Islam placed so much emphasis on controlling one's anger? The third objective, list the virtues of controlling one's anger. The virtues of controlling one's anger and cite supporting evidence for these virtues. So list the virtues of controlling one's anger and cite evidences to support these virtues. Next one, list the practical steps a person should take to suppress and control their anger. Practical steps a person should take to suppress and control their anger. Practical steps a person should take to control and suppress their anger. And finally, clarify situations where anger is allowed and encouraged. Clarify situations wherein anger is allowed and encouraged. Situations where anger is allowed and encouraged. Okay, let's begin. Let's begin first and foremost with a definition of anger. A definition of anger. The scholars of Islam, when they define anger linguistically, you like that, right?
Because I want to see your face, not the mic.
Ah, okay, got you. Okay. Yeah, I can see it. You want me to sit like this? Because ultimately I'm going to lean forward. I'm going to lean forward ultimately.
Because the mic looks so big in the screen, so nobody will.
I'm going to lean forward. It's going to happen. So the scholars of Islam, when they mention the definition of anger linguistically, from a language perspective, they say it is thawran or غليان دم القلب إرادة الانتقام. ثوران أو غليان دم القلب إرادة الانتقام. They say basically, what is the reality of anger? The reality of anger is that ها؟
ثوران مش ثوران.
ثوران. أنا آسف. طيب جزاك الله خير إبراهيم. ثوران بالفتح. طيب المهم. So basically what they say is that anger, what it is that the blood in the heart becomes agitated. Starts to boil almost. To the point that it's about to what? Yeah. إرادة الانتقام. Desiring what? Vengeance. So something happens, something is said, something is done, it makes a person what? Get so agitated that he wants to do what? He wants to strike back. He could strike back physically, he could strike back verbally, but he wants to do what? He wants to strike back. That is the reality, or how they describe anger. And this feeling in the heart and the actions that it inspires is something that Islam wants to what? Manage. Wants to control. Wants people to be able to what? Rein in and bridle. So we have many verses in a hadith where we're taught the importance, or where the management of anger is stressed. So for example, in Surah Ash-Shura, the 42nd Surah, verse 37, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْفَوَاحِشِ وَإِذَا مَا غَضِبُوا هُمْ يَغْفِرُونَ. He says, and those who avoid the major sins and acts of indecency, and when they are angry, they pardon and forgive. In another verse, which is in Surah Al-Imran, verse number 134, the third surah, verse 134, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He praises the people who can control their anger, repress their anger. He says, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. He says, and those who repress their anger and pardon people. And Allah loves those who do good deeds. And in the hadith, the famous hadith, collected by Bukhari, on the authority of Abu Hurairah, who narrates, أن رجلا قال للنبي صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أوصني, that a man came to the Prophet and he said, give me a piece of advice, advise me. So the Prophet, he responded, قال لا تغضب. He said, don't get angry. فردد مرارا. So the man, he repeated the question again and again. He said, advise me, advise me. And every time he said it, the Prophet said, لا تغضب. Don't get angry. Don't get angry. طيب. So now if you notice, I want you to pay attention that the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't tell the, he said to the man, don't get angry. Don't get angry. But we know that anger is a natural what? Instinct. It's an emotion. It's a natural instinct. It's a feeling that occurs what? It occurs what? Automatically. It occurs automatically. It's not something necessarily that you can, its existence in the heart is not something that you can necessarily control, something you can prevent, but rather it's something that happens instinctively. It just what? It just happens. Okay? You see something, you hear something, you feel something that makes you angry, and you what? You get angry what? In your heart. And you can't control that. You can't, it's not a switch you can just what? Turn off and say, I'm not going to get angry. It doesn't work like that. So because of this, the scholars of Islam, when they studied this hadith, they said that the literal meaning of the hadith is not intended. The literal meaning of the hadith is not what Allah intended. I'm sorry, what the Prophet intended. The Prophet is not telling us that when we see something, we hear something, or something happens to us which makes us angry, that we're somehow supposed to become like what? Like statues. Like inanimate objects which have no emotion. That's not what the Prophet is saying. He's not saying that, but rather he's saying, because that would be asking us to do something impossible. That's not what the Prophet is saying, but rather, what the Prophet is actually saying is what? What do you think he's saying? Control your anger, or don't act. Don't act on your anger, right? That we have to control ourselves when we're angry. We have to control ourselves when we're angry. We don't act on our anger, and we don't do what our anger tells us to do. Our anger tells us to do things. And so the Prophet is saying, when he says, don't get angry, is what? Don't do what your anger tells you to do. Don't obey your anger. That's what the Prophet is actually saying. So you're supposed to control yourself. And this is supported by another hadith, collected by Bukhari Muslim on the authority of Abu Hurairah, in which the Prophet said, لَيْسَ الشَّدِيدُ بِالسُّرْعَةِ. He says, the strong man is not the one who out-wrestles his opponent and throws him down on the mat. إِنَّمَا الشَّدِيدُ الَّذِي يَمْلِكُ نَفْسَهُ عِنْدَ الْغَضَبِ. He says, rather, the strong man is the one who controls himself when he's angry. That's real strength. Real strength is when what? You can rein yourself in and you just don't what? React on your anger. So this is what the Prophet intended in the first hadith. When he said don't get angry, he meant don't act on your anger and don't do what your anger tells you to do, but rather rein yourself in. Bridle yourself and control yourself when angry. طيب, now notice in the hadith, the Prophet, he says, لا تغضب, لا تغضب, لا تغضب. Even though the person kept saying what? Advise me. Okay, I got that. I get it. Okay, give me another advice. So the Prophet just kept saying what? لا تغضب. As if what? To emphasize the importance of not getting angry or controlling your anger. Right? So he kept repeating it. Why? Why does he repeat it? Why does he emphasize it? Why does Islam emphasize a person avoiding his anger, avoiding the causes of anger, and controlling his anger? The answer comes from some of the scholars. Tell the Sheikh, go ahead.
Because you might do something that you're not supposed to do.
That's awesome. Because the scholars actually said that one of the reasons why we control our anger is because people typically do what? When they're angry, they do things and they say things which later, when their anger subsides, they what? they regret. They actually regret. So that's one of the reasons. As Ja'far ibn Muhammad, he said, Al-ghadabu miftahu kulli shar. He said, anger is the key which opens the door to every evil thing. This is the key that opens the door to what? Evil. And this is true because people, they commit the most heinous crimes when what? When they're angry. Even when what? When those crimes they run contrary to that person's character. So you have people, for example, and I know this firsthand, you have people who are in prison for murder. And they are not, that is not who they are. Not everybody who's in prison for murder, you think, like you watch TV, you watch these movies and you see about these people who are what? They are like, they're psychopaths. They have an avarice for blood and for causing people harm. You have people like this in the world, but not everybody who's in jail for murder is like this. But you have a person who what? He was put in a situation, something happened, he got really what? Upset, emotional, got angry, and then what? Reacted. And then when his anger subsided, the real him was left to what? To bear the burden of the crime he committed. And that's like a major example. You have minor examples. A person could what? A person could get angry and could strike their child. They're angry. And they strike the child, but that's not really who they are. But when they strike the child, they could do what? They could call the child some what? Some brain damage. Right? You guys see that? So the point I'm trying to make is that these evil things that come about, what caused them? Murder, harming a child, a defenseless child. They come about through what? Through ghadab. The key that opened the door to what? These evil things was what? Was anger. Another reason why Islam emphasizes controlling one's anger is that the root and foundation of good character, which all of us are supposed to strive for, is self-control and controlling one's temper. This is the root of it. Basically, a person says, okay, what's the key to having good character? So we said the key to evil is anger. What's the key to having good character? Or what's the key to all good? It's what? Controlling what? Controlling yourself, controlling your temper. And Ibn Mubarak, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, each one of them was asked, Ijma' lana husn al-khuluq fi kalima. Each one of them was asked, define good character in a single sentence. Give us a single sentence by which we can know what is good character. And they all said, tarkul ghadab. They all said avoiding anger. They all said avoiding anger. And finally, Ibn Rajab, he says that he basically kind of like summarizes what we just said, and he says that the vessel of all evil, the thing which will bring about all evil, or evil always goes back to what? Al-ghadab. It goes back to what? Anger. And he says that controlling one's anger is what? It is the vessel that carries with it all what? All good. So this is why Islam emphasizes people to what? To control their temper, because nothing but good can come from being in what? Being in control. Being in control of yourself when you're angry, And nothing but evil can come when what? When you don't control your anger. And it's true. Wallahi, it's true. So that being the case, the question comes, well, how do you suppress your anger? What do you do to control your anger? What do you do to rein your anger in and keep yourself from what? Doing or acting out your anger. And there are a few etiquettes, there are a few methods that the Prophet gave the believers, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to control their anger and to avoid acting on their anger. So one thing is to make an isti'adha min ash-shaytan, that we seek refuge with Allah from the devil. Whenever you're angry, you do what? You seek Allah's refuge from the devil. And the proof of this comes in the hadith collected by Bukhari Muslim on the authority of Sulaiman ibn Sard. Sulaiman ibn Sard, in which he said, Kuntu jalisan ma'a Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I was sitting with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And there were two men who were doing what? They were arguing and they were exchanging insults. They were arguing, exchanging insults. And one of them, the face of one of them, it turned what? It turned beet red. And the veins of his neck start to what? To protrude, which is a clear sign of what? His anger is about to boil over. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw this, he said, إِنِّي لَأَعْلَمُ كَلِمَةً لَوْ قَالَهَا ذَهَبَ عَنْهُ مَا يَجِدْ. He said, I certainly know an expression that if only he said it, his anger would subside. Then he said, لَوْ قَالَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ ذَهَبَ عَنْهُ مَا يَجِدْ. He said, if only he would say, I seek refuge with Allah from the devil, his anger would subside. So the key thing for the believer when he first feels anger coming on is that he does what? He seeks refuge with Allah from a shaitan. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان. طيب. ثم بعد ذلك, another etiquette that the Prophet taught us when we get angry is that we should change our position. When you get angry, change your position, change your place, change your stance. So for example, he said in the hadith, collected by Abu Dawood on the authority of Abi Dharr, وصححه الألباني رحمه الله تعالى, hadith which was authenticated by Al-Albani, he said, إذا غضب أحدكم وهو قائم فليجلس فإن ذهب عنه الغضب وإلا فليضطجع. He said, if one of you becomes angry while he is standing, then let him sit down. And this should cause his anger to subside. And if not, if he still is angry while he's seated, then let him do what? Lie down. Let him what? Lie down. Until his anger subsides. And think about it. If you're angry and you're standing, what are you likely to do? You're likely to lunge. You're likely to lash out. But you're less likely to do that if you do what? If you sit down. Now, if your anger is still boiling, you might do what? You might get up again, right? Mm-hmm. So then if your anger is still boiling, do what? Lie down. Because it's that much more of an effort. You're putting that much more distance between you and what? And doing something wrong. Doing something bad. You guys see that? So you put the greatest distance between you and acting on your anger. طيب. ثم بعد ذلك, another thing that the scholars have recommended, as mentioned by Ibn Rajab, he said, another thing the scholars have recommended is that when you are angry, then you should do what? You should be quiet. You should remain silent until your anger subsides. Why do you think that is, Ya Akhwan? Why do you think we've been recommended to what? To remain silent when we're angry. Yeah, you'll say something you'll regret. Akid, you'll say something which you will regret. You may curse, you may insult, you may say things which are extremely harmful and whose consequences are very severe. And give me an example of that. Give me an example of something that people say when they're angry which has serious repercussions. One of the things that people do all the time, husband and wife start arguing back and forth, right? And then the husband gets angry and he says what? I divorce you. And you have to understand that once that word leaves your mouth and you do it knowingly, you're in your right mind and you say that, it what? It's mahsub alayk. It counts. It counts against you. Okay? Because as the companions they used to say, or they used to have this qaida, they used to say, thalathatun, hazluhunna jiddun, wa jidduhunna jidd. There are three things. Huh? It's not a hadith. It's not a hadith, but it's a qaida. It's a principle that the companions, basically, they held it. So there is a hadith like this, but it's not authentic. Okay. But it's a qaida. They used to say that there are three things that when they're done seriously, they're serious. And when they're done in jesting, they're also serious. And one of them is what? At-talaq. When a person says, I divorce you, that's what? That's a serious thing. And it happens all the time when what? When couples start arguing and the husband is angry. So people say things when they're angry that they don't really mean, but they have what? Consequences. Okay? A person, two people, two friends, could get angry, get into an argument, and one of them will say something insulting. And they say it out of anger. They don't really mean it. And it can do what? Destroy that friendship forever. So this is why the scholars have recommended, and they say basically that when people are angry, they should what? Remain silent. It's good business. طيب, ثم بعد ذلك, we mentioned the virtue of controlling one's anger. The virtue of controlling one's anger. So what are some of the things that we hope to gain if we can learn to control our anger? The first thing is that avoiding anger is a cause for entering paradise. If a person can control their anger, it can cause them to be what? It's a way or a means to what? To enter paradise. And the proof for this is that some of the versions of the hadith of Abu Hurairah, which mentioned earlier, the Prophet, the man came and he said, Ya Rasulullah, dullani ala amalin yudkhiluni al-jannah. He said, O Messenger of Allah, guide me to a deed which will enter me into paradise, or will cause me to enter paradise. And the Prophet replied, La taghdab wa laka al-jannah. He said, do not get angry, and paradise is yours. So this hadith, the Prophet is saying that if people can control their anger, it can be what? A means for them to enter paradise. But another virtue of controlling your anger is that when one controls himself when he's angry, yarhamukallah, he will have his choice of the maidens of paradise. When a man controls his anger when he's angry, he will have his choice of the maidens of paradise. This is proven or supported by the hadith collected by al-Khamsa, except an-Nasa'i, on the authority of Mu'adh ibn Jabal, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Man kadhama ghayran wa huwa qadirun ala an yunfidahu da'ahu Allahu azza wa jal ala ru'us al-khalaiq yawm al-qiyamati hatta yukhayyiruhu Allah min huri ma sha'. He says in this hadith, he says, whoever suppresses his anger, while he is totally capable of acting upon it, Allah, mighty and majestic is He, will summon him on the day of resurrection in front of all creation, and let him choose from the maidens of paradise whichever one he wishes. So there's another reward or incentive to suppress our anger, is that not only will a person enter paradise, but he'll be given what? His choice of what? The maidens of paradise. But a third virtue of controlling one's anger is that whoever controls his anger will be the furthest away from the anger of Allah. He will be the furthest away from Allah's anger. The furthest away from Allah's anger. Ahmed has collected on the authority of Ibn Umar that he asked the Messenger of Allah. Ibn Umar, he said, مَاذَا يُبَعِدُنِي مِنْ غَضَبِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. He said, what will keep me furthest away from Allah's anger? What should I do, O Messenger of Allah, if I don't want Allah to be angry with me? He said, La taghdab. He said, don't get angry. Don't get angry. So this is important too. Nobody wants Allah to be angry. We want Allah to be pleased with us. One of the means for that is what? To be people who what? Control our anger. طيب, another virtue of controlling your anger is that there are lots of things that people can do what? Can try to control. That as believers, we always want to be what? We always want to be in control, and we never want to be controlled by anything. We never want to be a slave to anything except who? Allah. So for example, let's say we have certain things that we like a lot, like food. Some people what? They like food. They might even be addicted to food. They have to do what? Control that, right? They have to control that, and they have to be in control of food and not let food be in control of them. Some people get addicted to caffeine, right? They get addicted to coffee. Okay? They're those people who want, they start shaking and they're standing outside the Starbucks waiting for it to open, right? At 4 o'clock in the morning. Because they have to have that, that fix. But it's not proper for a believer to what? To be controlled by coffee, but rather he should control coffee. So he wants to do what? He wants to rein these types of desires and passions in and be in control of what? His desires. So there's lots of things he can try to control in his life, but the best thing he can try to control is his anger, right? The best thing he can try to control. And this is evidenced by the hadith collected by Ahmed, again on the authority of Ibn Umar, in which the Prophet said, ما تجرأ عبد جرأة أفضل عند الله عز وجل من جرأة غيظ يكظمها ابتغاء وجه الله تعالى. So he said, no slave has ever swallowed anything superior in the sight of Allah than the swallowing of his rage, which he suppresses seeking the face of Allah. So this is another key thing, ya ikhwan, that we get put in situations where we get very upset and we want to lash out. But the best thing we can do in that case, and the reward in the sight of Allah is tremendous, if we can do what? Repress our anger for Allah's sake. طيب. So we've talked extensively about what is anger, why is it controlling anger emphasized in Islam, what is the virtue of controlling anger, what are some of the etiquettes of controlling anger. And we might understand from this that there's no instance, there's no situation or circumstance where a person is encouraged to be what? To be angry. We might understand from this. And whatever the circumstances is, I should never what? Allow myself to get angry or allow what? Myself to act on my anger. But the fact of the matter is that there are some situations where anger is what? Allowed and encouraged. Allowing yourself to get angry and what? Act on your anger is what? Allowed and encouraged. Alright? So basically, when do we do this and when do we do that? Basically, we shouldn't allow ourselves to get angry for worldly matters. We shouldn't allow ourselves to get angry for what? Worldly matters. We shouldn't allow ourselves to get angry for worldly matters. And we shouldn't allow ourselves to get angry on our own behalf. You guys got that? So 2 cases where we shouldn't allow ourselves to get angry on what? Worldly matters and angry on our own behalf or for our own sake. I'm angry because what? Because of something someone did to me personally. But rather we should save our anger for those instances when the teachings of Allah are what? Violated. And the sanctity of His deen is what? Is transgressed. And this way, when we get angry, we're getting angry for Allah's sake, and we actually do what? We get reward for being angry. And so in this case, our anger works for us and not against us. You guys see that? Our anger, if we do that, if we get angry for Allah's sake, when His deen is violated, then our anger will work for us and not against us. And that's what the believer is always trying to do. He's always trying to do what? These natural emotions that we have, we want to what? We want to be rewarded for them. They're natural. They're going to come naturally, but we want to be rewarded. We want to make these natural emotions work for us. So, for example, it's natural for me to take my son. He needs a pair of shoes. To take him and what? Buy him a pair of what? Shoes. It's a natural thing that as a parent, you're going to take care of their needs. You're going to be generous to them, etc. But it won't work for me unless what? Unless I actively intend what? Intend by Allah's face. That I have to bring into that what? That intention of what? Doing it because what? This is a rewardable act in Islam. That Allah wants a father to do what? To spend on his son. If I just do it naturally, I won't get the reward. But if I bring the intention into it, the intention of what? Earning Allah's reward, then this deed that I'm going to do anyway works for me. You guys see that? The same thing. That anger is a natural emotion. It's an instinct. It's going to happen. But if I let it happen and I act on it and I use it for Allah's sake, it works what? It works for me and I get what? Reward for it. So this is what we should try to do. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ, he used to do. So for example, you have instances where the Prophet himself would be what? Mistreated. He would be mistreated. We have instances, for example, when Arabi, a villager, would come to the Prophet and do what? Grab him by the collar. Pull the collar really tight to the point that it would cut off the Prophet's circulation. His face would turn red and you could see the garment was beginning to what? Create marks in his neck. And the Arabi would say in a gruff voice, give me from what Allah has given you. You might even call him by his first name, Ya Muhammad, which is an insult. It's an insult to call the Prophet by his first name. So anyway, and the Prophet would do what? He would be patient. Even though the person is what? Mistreating him. They have every right to what? They have every right to maybe push him off. Ask companions to rough him up and teach him a lesson, right? But the Prophet would do that. He would never do that. He would actually what? He would be kind to the person, even though the person is mistreating him. We also have the famous hadith where the Prophet, he received sadaqah, or he received some spoils from a particular ghazwa, a particular battle that occurred. And he starts to do what? Naturally. When he gets the spoils, he starts to distribute. So then the person comes and he says, this distribution is unfair. And you don't want Allah's face by this distribution. You're insulting the Prophet and you're questioning his integrity now. And the Prophet ﷺ, when this was said to him, obviously he felt hurt by this. He felt attacked by this. And his integrity was being brought into question. But he didn't react. Rather he said, رحم الله موسى قد أوذي بأكثر من هذا فصبر. He said, may Allah have mercy upon Moses. He was harmed in a manner worse than this, but he patiently endured. So if he endured, I'm going to what? I'm going to endure. I'm going to be patient. This is the way the Prophet ﷺ. So when he was mistreated himself, he would never do what? He would never respond or get angry or act on his anger for his own sake. We also have the hadith collected by Muslim authority of Aisha, in which she said, ما ضرب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شيئا قط بيده ولا امرأة ولا خادما إلا أن يجاهد في سبيل الله وما نيل منه شيء قط فينتقم من صاحبه. She said, the Messenger of Allah never struck anyone with his hand out of anger, neither a woman nor a servant, except while waging war in the path of Allah. And he never took revenge against anyone who insulted or mistreated him in any way. Somebody did something to the Prophet, it was done to him, he never did what? He never took revenge, he never acted on his anger. But she went on to say, إِلَّا أَن يُنْتَهَكْ شَيْءٌ مِّن مَحَارِمِ اللَّهِ فَيَنْتَقِمُ لِلَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. Except in those cases where the boundaries of Allah were transgressed. Which means what? Those were instances where he would what? He would act on his anger and take revenge, but not for his own sake, for the sake of Allah. So when the commands of Allah were violated, he would get angry. And he would do it, he would get angry for the sake of Allah. And sometimes he would even act upon his what? His anger. And there's an instance of this that Aisha also narrates. That once the Prophet ﷺ, he came to her home. He entered her home. And she had this curtain hanging. And that curtain had what? Had pictures on it. It had drawings on it. فَتَلَوَّنَ وَجْهُهُ. His face, it turned what? It turned red. His face turned red. ثُمَّ تَنَاوَلَ السِّتْرَ فَهَتَكَهُ. Then he took down the curtain, and he didn't just take it down and like fold it up and hand it to her and say, get rid of this. He did what? He ripped it up. He ripped it up. And then he said, مِنَ الشَّدِّ النَّاسِ عَذَابًا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ الَّذِينَ يُصَوِّرُونَ هَذِهِ الصُّوَرِ. Then he said, amongst the people who receive the severest punishment on the day of judgment are the people who draw pictures like these. So he saw this wrong thing happening in his house, and he addressed it immediately, and he physically what? Acted. He became angry. We know he was angry because what? His face turned red. And then he what? He acted on his anger and what? Tore up the sitr. And so you see the Prophet got angry when the limits of Allah were transgressed, and he acted on that anger. And he mentioned the sin of the people who draw these pictures. So there's a lesson here that I want to mention quickly as a side note, is that people shouldn't belittle or ridicule and make fun of the religious people when they get angry for the sake of Allah. When they get angry for the sake of Allah. So what happens is sometimes when something's done wrong in the mosque, for example, a person who cares about the deen, he sees people, for example, they're running in the mosque and they're laughing and joking and making lots of noise in the mosque while people are praying. So the person will say, hey, you should be quiet. And they'll say it forcefully like that. And they're doing it because what? It's the house of Allah and it should be respected. And other people will say, what's wrong with this guy? He's a maniac. He's a fanatic. He's crazy. You know, has he lost his mind? What's wrong with him? And they'll get angry with that person. They'll ridicule them. They'll speak negative about him. They'll even leave the mosque going on about how this person is what? You know, he's fanatical. You know, he's radical. He's extreme or whatever. And at no point will they what? Will criticize the action of those people who are what? Who are disrespecting the mosque. And they'll say that this person is what? He's making a big deal out of nothing. They consider what? Violating the religion of Allah as what? As nothing. And this is not nothing. And this applies whether we're talking about the mosque or even the home. That the husband, as an example of the Prophet and Aisha, that the husband may see something wrong in the home and he'll say, hey, this shouldn't be done. And he doesn't beat things. He doesn't, kick the wall. But he just says, hey, this shouldn't be done. Get rid of that. And then it will be said that, the husband's, there's something wrong with him. He's fanatical. He's too extreme. He says, no. That he has a right to do what? To get angry for the sake of Allah. He should get angry. And people should what? Appreciate that type of anger. Just like we appreciate the anger of the Prophet with the what? The bringing down of this curtain. Another example of when the Prophet's anger would intensify and he would basically act out his anger, he would display it openly, is when he was delivering his sermons. When he was giving his Friday khutbah, right? He would what? His anger would be on display, so to speak. And the proof of this is the hadith of Jabir, collected by Muslim, in which the Prophet Jabir ibn Abdullah, he describes the khutbah of the Prophet. He said, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا خطب احمرت عيناه وعلى صوته واشتد غضبه حتى كأنه منذر جيش. The Messenger of Allah, when he delivered a sermon, his eyes would turn red, his voice would be elevated, and his anger would intensify, as if he were warning of an impending army. And so this teaches you another thing too, and this is another area where Muslims have kind of like, they've kind of lost the correct understanding. So you have a khatib who, when he gives the khutbah, he gives it with harara, right? He gives like a fiery speech. And there's a lot of what? Emotion. And a lot of people will leave the mosque saying, oh, that was an awful khutbah. What's wrong with him? He was angry. He was, I felt like he was admonishing us. And they feel that that's a bad thing. And that the khutbah should be monotone. Brothers and sisters in Islam, we should be good. We should love each other. Religion is love. Love is religion. Let's pray. They think this should be the khutbah. That's how the khutbah should be. It should be monotone. But I'm asking you honestly, does that affect you? It doesn't. And the purpose of the khutbah is to what? To affect you, to wake you up, to frighten you. It's preaching. The khutbah is what? It's preaching. So it's not supposed to always be a pat on the back. Sometimes it's supposed to be what? A slap on the backside. Honestly. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he spoke sometimes, because what he had passion, he was afraid, he was concerned. He used to say it to his companions, I'm like that person standing at a fire. And there's a bunch of moths who get attracted to the fire, but they end up getting what? Burned. I'm that one who just what? I'm pushing the moths away because I'm afraid they're going to be burned. This is how he was with his ummah. He cared about them. And how you can tell the khatib who cares is when he what? He stands here and he what? He preaches, he pleads, he begs, and his emotion pours out because he actually cares. He's not indifferent. He's not indifferent like, well, if they get the message, alhamdulillah. If they don't get it, alhamdulillah. He's not indifferent. He actually cares if they don't get the message. And you can tell that it comes out what? In the fieriness of his speech. So one of the lessons we learn from this is that there is a time and place for anger and a proper way to express it. So obviously there are limits. A person shouldn't say, well, I'm angry for the sake of Allah, so I exceed acceptable limits. So let's go back to the instance where the people were running back and forth in the mosque and they were getting loud and they were making disturbance. A person to say, hey, sit down, this is the mosque, respect the mosque. They're displaying their ghadab, but that's what? Acceptable. Suppose he was to what? Tackle one of them, right? And start accosting them. That wouldn't be what? That would be exceeding what? The bounds. That wouldn't be an acceptable way of expressing anger. So there's limits, but it is what? It is a time and place which is acceptable for what? For anger, especially if it's done, or only if it's done for the sake of Allah. Tafadhal, Sheikh.
They might even think that you're trying to play with them, so they won't even
They'll play more, huh? Like, any questions, comments, complaints? Any questions, comments, complaints? Going once? Going twice?
بمجموع طرقه حسن.
What's that, sure?
الحديث بمجموع طرقه
حسن. أي واحدة؟
ثلاثة.
الحسد?
لا.
You sure? I don't know about that, but I'll agree with you if you say so. You're the boss. You like that one? Okay.
Use the speakers.